مشاهدينا مرحبا بكم في حوارات السياق. بدأ الرئيس الأمريكي جو بايدن ولايته الرئاسية بمحاولة تهميش منطقة الخليج والانسحاب منها قدر الإمكان لملء الفراغ في مناطق أخرى من العالم، إلا أنه بمرور الوقت تبين للولايات المتحدة أن خسارة هذه المنطقة يعني التمهيد لخسائر متتالية غير متوقعة، ليعود البيت الأبيض مجددا يتلمس وضع قدمه عله يصلح ما أفسده الرئيس السادس والأربعون. عموما للمزيد من المتابعة حول هذا الملف ينضم إلينا من نيودلهي الدبلوماسي الهندي السابق MK بهدر كومار. سفير بهدر، مرحبا بك معنا.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
بعد إعادة العلاقات السعودية الإيرانية، هل تأخرت زيارة سوليفان إلى المنطقة؟
I don't know whether it came too late or not, but as I see it, it has a hidden agenda. And that hidden agenda is obviously the fact that the Saudi-Iranian rapprochement was brokered or mediated by China. And this particular visit is aimed at that, because what is disconcerting for the Americans is the fact that China has appeared as a mediator. United States is not able to appreciate the fact that China is uniquely placed to play such a mediatory role because it has good relations with both Saudi Arabia and Iran. And it is also a stakeholder in regional security and stability of the Gulf and the Middle East as a whole. So China has a legitimate interest in fostering amity and reconciliation between the regional states. But the United States is looking at it through the prism of its rivalry with China. And the fact and the fear that the American hegemony in the Gulf region is eroding very fast. This is not the only sign of it. In fact, signs are multiplying. And even in the United States, there is a criticism that the United States' influence in the Middle East is on the wane. So this has a domestic resonance. You know, this is everything is now going to be in terms of President Biden's re-election bid. And therefore, you know, there is a domestic resonance to all foreign policy moves that the United States will be making between now and next year in November. That is one thing. Secondly, the United States' rivalry with China. And it is a reasonable assumption, all of us know, that one country which is supportive of the Saudi-Iranian reconciliation is obviously Russia. And therefore, these positive trends in the region, they are not being perceived in positive terms by the United States. They are being viewed as major foreign policy challenges for the United States from the point of view of its interests. So Sullivan's visit, in my opinion, has to be seen in this context. We can discuss it, but you know, the fact that he announced it first in a think tank speech in Washington D.C. And immediately after that, the Israelis picked it up, and there is a lot of hype in the Israeli press about this. And there have even been interpretations already given that this is an extension of the so-called I2U2 initiative, which is involving Israel, United Arab Emirates, India, and the United States. They had the foreign ministers at a meeting. So that this is an offshoot of that. So you see, there's all kinds of spin, you know, we are able to see here. So what we need to do is we need to analyze the motives behind this, and we need to analyze where it is all going and where it is not going to go.
الخطوات الأمريكية في المنطقة تضمنت أيضا مشاركة ممثلين من الهند. هل تحتاج الهند إلى وساطة أمريكية في الخليج؟
Very good question. Very good question. I was going to come to that. You know, the one aspect of this that I cannot figure out is why does India need the American mediary for any kind of dialogue with the Gulf region? They are actually fraternal people for India. And these are, you know, regional states with which India has interacted historically through centuries. When did the United States appear in the Gulf region? A few decades ago. But India's relationship with the region is such a profound relationship. And they are very close, they are very friendly. Millions of Indians are living in that region. And it's a flourishing relationship in economic terms already. You know, for example, I understand that in the last year, United Arab Emirates invested about $12 billion in India. Now, it's a very big investor. Now, this is the kind of relationship that the two countries have been able to forge in the recent years. And why should India? I mean, in fact, on the other hand, with the bad image that the United States has in the West Asian region and also in the Gulf region, too much of association with the United States is going to be a liability for Indian diplomacy. Why should India have that diplomacy? India also has excellent relations with Iran, excellent relations with the UAE, with Saudi Arabia. And what is the additionality that the United States can bring into this? Zero. I'm sure you agree with me.
السؤال هنا، هل ستقبل الهند بلعب هذا الدور الذي تقترحه واشنطن؟
Do you know one thing? You know that I don't know if you have noticed it. The government of India has not given any hype to this. Mr. Sullivan's visit to the region, or the fact that he had met the Indian National Security Advisor there. My feeling is that the meeting between Sullivan and the National Security Advisor, which took place in Jeddah, was primarily devoted to the US-Indian relationship. And that is because the President Biden is meeting Indian Prime Minister not once, not twice, 3 times in the month of May. So the agenda that the two people will discuss, all this need to be quickly finalized. So I think it is issues of this kind, you know, that is there. And Sullivan has given a spin that he's come with a very big proposal to connect the east and the west of Saudi Arabia with a railway line and all that. Now, as far as I know, there is a long-standing project of this kind called the land bridge. The land bridge railway link between the Red Sea and the Gulf region all across Saudi Arabia, which is estimated to cost $26.6 billion. And that this project is at its financing stage. And the big party which is steering this project is a Chinese consortium. So Sullivan is, I think, far too late to come into the scene with a concept which is already taken shape in Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia has no problem, you know, in attracting Saudi Arabia, UAE. These are flourishing countries. They have no problem in attracting investment from China. China knows that these are dynamic economies, and China has a very strong interest in building substance into the relationship. So more content into the relationship. You look at it yesterday, United Arab Emirates signed 3 agreements with 3 nuclear power related entities in China. So, you know, it's a very substantive relationship we are talking about. And therefore, I can't see why Saudi Arabia will want to look beyond this Chinese consortium for any idea that Sullivan may have. Secondly, does United States have any experience in building railway projects in foreign countries? Everyone knows that railway projects in the United States are in a shambles. There are very frequent train accidents nowadays in the United States. And it has no expertise in infrastructure projects, undertaking infrastructural projects in other countries. So you see, Sullivan is a very clever man, you know. He is able to, you know, produce rabbits out of his hat. So, you know, he's a magician. with words. But there is very little transparency, and it's not a secret. There's very little transparency in any of his actions. You look today that China is not even wanting to talk to the United States because China complains that these officials say one thing and they do another thing. So what is the point in talking to people like that? So Sullivan's mission was, I come back to the original point, Sullivan's mission was to register in the American domestic audience that there has been no erosion in the influence and prestige and all that and the dominance of the United States in the Gulf region. He's wanting to demonstrate that he is in some kind of, Biden administration is in some kind of action in the Gulf region. I think that is the primary motive. And of course, they have reason to feel disturbed that so much is happening in the region. It is not only the Saudi-Iranian reconciliation, it is also a reconciliation in Yemen. It is also a reconciliation between Damascus and Riyadh. There is so much happening in that region. And one common denominator in all these historic changes taking place in the Gulf and West Asian region is the absence of the United States. It has no role in any of these things. So it is trying to insert itself into this positive ambience, that is developing in the regional politics in your part of the world.
وكأنك تخبرني أن هذه الدول لن تقبل المقترح الأمريكي.
We don't know what is the American proposal, my friend. What is the American proposal? I mentioned to you that he's talking about a railway project which is already under implementation as far as I can see, connecting the west and the east of Saudi Arabia. So what is it that he's talking about? It remains a mystery. And now, by the time he has got back to Washington, I'm very sure he's forgotten all about this railway project. So we have a down-to-earth attitude towards these things. If there is a project in which America is going to invest tens and billions of dollars in that region, and there is a role for India to take part in those projects, well, India will consider. What's wrong with that? India will consider. But we don't know. First of all, we should know what we are getting into.
في المقابل لماذا اهتم به الإسرائيليون وضخموا منه إعلامياً؟
See, Israel is pretty much isolated today in the region. And Israel's objective is to break out of that isolation. That is number one. And it has a long history of riding on the back of the Americans. So they are putting into this a spin, which is, in my opinion, is completely propagandistic. And completely propagandistic. I don't think this was Sullivan's agenda, and that peddling the interests of Israel. I don't think the United States has got that kind of influence in that region anymore. Certainly, this is none of India's business. If Israel is not popular in the West Asian region, it is for obvious reasons. And when you have things like this happening, like the Israeli aircraft going and bombing Gaza and killing the leaders in that country and their family members, their women folk, their children, how can anyone be, happy about it, about Israeli policies? So but I can understand it because Israel wants to project itself as a relevant player in the geopolitics of the Gulf and the West Asian region. And that is create an optics, in other words. And Israeli diplomacy is always very good in creating optics, even when substance is lacking. And this is a typical example of that.
هل تخشى واشنطن من اتفاقيات التجارة بالعملات الوطنية بديلاً عن الدولار في المنطقة؟
Well, this process, which has begun seriously in the recent months, has already gathered some momentum. It's a long journey. Let's not kid about it. It's a long journey. It will take time. But the important point is, it is likely to gain traction. It is likely to gain traction because the thing which has been done to Russia, weaponization of sanctions, is a very bad thing. Most countries do not agree with this. The United States has apparently sanctioned something like 1/3 of the world, in terms of countries. 1/3 of the world is under American sanctions, apparently. I was reading somewhere. So whenever it is displeased with some aspect of the policy of a country, it immediately imposes sanctions. That's what it does. So that is something we have learned to live as a fact of life of the United States' belligerent foreign policy. Most countries do not respect this. They wish that these sanctions should have United Nations' mandate. And without United Nations mandate, they are invalid. But they are forced to comply because of the threat that there will be collateral sanctions if the other countries also do not fall in line. Isn't this what has been happening? But all that is history. Now what has happened is the United States has not only imposed sanctions on Russia, it has actually seized the Russian assets abroad, Russian foreign exchange reserves. Now this is a qualitatively different situation. This is, in terms of common idiom, one can only say this is highway robbery. The money is parked in American banks, so they just take it away. So which means it's a law of the jungle. They decide what they will do, and what they decide and do is the law. So, a number of countries will feel worried because tomorrow, if some country does not fall in line on climate change, as per the American wishes, for example, there could be sanctions. Its foreign exchange reserves in America could be seized unilaterally by the United States. So, a thinking is developing, therefore, among a large number of countries. These are not adversaries of the United States. These are countries which are friendly towards the United States, which want to have a relationship with the United States. But first and foremost comes their own self-interest. And their self-interest dictates that it's risky to put money in American banks in dollars. So they will have to trade in local currencies. They will have to look for some other way of conducting their international transactions. It's pure logical. This is not an anti-American move. It's logical. And actually, the irony is President Putin had warned that precisely this was going to happen when the sanctions were imposed on Russia, that he appealed, in fact, to the United States to think very clearly whether it is going to be in American interest to do this, because this will lead to de-dollarization. And that's what we are seeing now.
فيما يتعلق بالهند، هي تحاول منذ بدء الحرب في أوكرانيا الحفاظ على نوع من التوازن في علاقاتها مع الشرق والغرب. كيف تقيم سياساتها حتى الآن؟
This is actually not something new. India has always maintained a non-aligned policy. India is against military blocs. India will never join NATO. Now the NATO is coming to Asia, but I can guarantee that India will never be a member of NATO. So India doesn't have a bloc mentality. And India doesn't like this kind of polarization that either you are with me or you are against me. That's not the Indian ethos as a civilization state. If there are differences, we should reconcile the differences. But the accent, India's policy's main accent, is actually India's development. And for that to happen, India needs a very peaceful external environment. And this sort of combative tone, this sort of polarization, this sort of proxy wars, sanctions, this is not the route which suits India. So actually, India did not do anything special. The India's position on Ukraine war came very naturally to India. And then look at the India-Russia relationship. It's a very profound relationship. It's a time-tested relationship. And it goes very deep. In fact, it is very unique. India doesn't have a relationship of this kind with any other country in the world. So there is no question of India sanctioning, apart from the fact that India opposes sanctions. India also joining these sanctions against Russia and so on. Now what has happened is, after the vacation of Western companies from Russia, and after the ban on Russian oil and so on, Russia is turning to the Eastern market, to the Asian market to sell. And if India gets oil at competitive prices, if you don't buy it, we should be exceedingly foolish people, because we are a huge importer of oil. We need it for decades to come. And the Indian economy is growing at such a fast rate, one of the fastest growing regions in the world today. And we need oil. And if someone tells us that we will give it to you for very competitive prices, call it discounted prices or whatever, why should we say no? Because it displeases the Americans. We should look after our interests first. So it came in, as far as I am concerned, there is absolutely nothing new in any of these things, because the India's national interest certainly must have the topmost priority in its foreign policy.
سؤالي الأخير عن منظمة شانغهاي، ما الذي ستضيفه هذه المنظمة لدول الخليج إذا انضمت بصفة شركاء في الحوار؟
Shanghai cooperation. Oh yes, it's a very important question. You know, one of the shift in global politics is this, that the West was very foolish to force a choice on the rest of the world. That is, either you are with us or you are against us. Most countries do not want this attitude. And secondly, all countries are, with the kind of multipolarity that is developing in the world, all countries are looking at the opportunity to have balanced relationships. I don't think that when United Arab Emirates sought, for example, a relationship with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and 2 days back, I think it was admitted as a partner country, it is not an anti-American move at all. The Americans see it that way, but it's not an anti-American move. It's a move which is important for the UAE's interests. Saudi Arabia is already a dialogue partner. Iran is a full member. Egypt is seeking, along with Bahrain and Kuwait, association with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And all this is because the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, you must see, is a very unique kind of organization. Its decision making is by consensus. No country, big or small, is dominating that organization. Its working style is all decisions have to be unanimously worked out, you know. So you see, that means, you know, that a country which goes onto a platform like that is able to exercise its strategic autonomy and advance its interests optimally. I don't think there is any other organization which works on the basis of this kind of principles. And the Shanghai Cooperation Organization also originally took shape as an organization for the Eurasian region. That is the Central Asian states, Russia, and China. But now it is also incorporated South Asian region. And with this relationship, it is going to come with its toes for the first time in the waters of the Gulf region. You know, it is entering the Middle East region, Gulf region to begin with. And it's a progressive journey. And I think that my own estimation is that in the next 10 years, it will be a world organization. And that kind of an organization offers many advantages for countries to be members of that kind of an organization. So far-sighted statesmen, far-sighted countries with long-term perspectives, they see the advantages, they anticipate how it is going to be beneficial for them in the coming decades. So this explains it. This is not a confrontational move against the United States. This doesn't mean that that the Gulf countries or India, for that matter, do not want a relationship with the United States. No, we are all looking for relationships, but we want to have the freedom to make our own choices, and that is very important because each country has its own interests, and those interests need to be advanced. And I'm very sure that the reconciliation processes which are taking place in the Gulf region, without any role or help from the United States, and nobody is actually even checking what the United States thinks about it, but it shows that countries are quite intensely aware of their strategic autonomy today and the choices that a multipolar world is going to provide for them to optimally pursue their national interests.
سفير بهدار، شكرا جزيلا لك للمشاركة معنا في حوارات السياق.
Thank you. Take care. All the best.
مشاهدينا، شكرا على طيب المتابعة. إلى الملتقى.